So I love the button clause. I do. It's wonderful. It's so inclusive. It covers just about anybody. But there's one group of people that I think need additional protection, the Amish, because they are not allowed to wear buttons. And to be fair, I don't know if that covers buttons that display something as compared to buttons which fasten. Those might be different categories of buttons. I'm not any kind of Anabaptist. I don't know. But what does the NLRA have to say about the Amish? That's my question.
I actually don't know. I mean, I guess I was thinking about it because I mentioned that there was technically an exception for Walmart with the button clause, which to me seems like the whole reason that all of these fucking contests of the button thing, because we talked about Tesla or whatever, but I looked it up and like Walmart has an exception for distracting buttons or some shit. Just like, I don't know. It's like some sort of marketing bullshit. Like you're like, remember the Squidward button that's like fucking huge?
Yeah,
Not allowed at Walmart.
Like that meme video of the guy who shows up at school and he's wearing a backpack that's as big as he is. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing? And he just kind of whips it around dangerously in the hallway. It's like that, but you have a button the size of a serving plate on your chest. And you're just winging it like Captain America.
Yeah. The previous slightly more conservative NLRB ruled against those.
Wow.
Damn. Yeah. Fucking repression fucking sucks.
Yeah, I mean... So it's kind of hard to transition from the repression of not being able to wear a button into the repression of actually being physically attacked by the cops. But we're going to do it, folks. We can do these verbal gymnastics here on Work Stoppage. That's why you listen to the show.
That's right. We're powerful.
But yeah, so I wanted to give a quick update before we get into the whole regular show. Because, I mean, folks, if you've been listening for a little bit, you might be aware that there's been a local strike here in Providence that I've been going to do support for with my PSL branch. And this past week, where they've now been on strike for almost 3 months, I showed up at the picket line to find a real big hullabaloo going on because just a couple of hours before I was there, the cops decided to just fucking attack the picket line.
Jesus.
And as they are known to do.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that's been so frustrating where ever since the strike started, the company has been hiring armed guards to harass the strikers. The cops have basically been preventing workers from even doing peaceful picketing. Like when you go, they'll walk.
You mentioned that last time you were there. They were timing out exactly 2 minutes of blocking and then going away and then coming back for 2 more minutes or whatever it was because the technicality is within the law or whatever.
Well, and then the cops decided they weren't even going to allow that and have since been if you even try and block somebody from getting into the DHL lot, which is where these Teamsters are striking, there's this DHL place in Pawtucket, which is North Providence. And if you get in their way, the cops immediately just get out of the way, move, and they're just constantly threatening people.
Well, it's like a cliche observation at this point where people are smug. They're like, a lot of cops don't even understand the law, so it's important for you to know the law. And it's actually, cops don't understand the law because they don't need to, because they can violate it or arrest you even when you're not violating it, and they will be protected anyway.
Yeah, and based on that, they decided to make up their own law even more on this past Friday, where... So, it's Friday, so there was some more Teamsters from other locals in the area had come down to, show their support, show strength on the picket line. And this was also conveniently right after the governor had come down to do a photo op on the line, which is exactly all of the actual help he's been willing to give the strikers, which is literally just showing up and not doing anything.
Well, that's slightly more than President Biden, who tweets the day afterward about how he supports the workers.
Yeah. Well, and then it's I support these workers, and then gives the company the workers are striking against a $10 billion Defense Department contract.
Yeah.
In the case of Amazon.
Exactly.
But so these workers, they're just walking the picket line, doing their normal thing. They're not really blocking cars because the cops haven't been letting them. And then the cops just decided to get all fucking aggro in people's faces, start threatening people verbally, start squaring up right in the face of strikers, and then just go nuts. And there's videos of it online or at least partial videos that you can see they just start taking people to the ground and pepper spraying the whole fucking crowd of strikers who weren't doing anything. They're just walking the line. Nobody hit a cop. Nobody pushed a cop. Nobody threatened a cop. None of that happened. It was literally just the cops decided they didn't like the fucking workers walking the picket line, and they wanted to show who's boss, and they decided to do that by making up the law again, attacking the strikers, pepper spraying the shit out of everybody there, and arresting 5 people. So
Wow.
That's fucking insane.
Fuck the police.
that's correct. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, as frustrating as this is, it's like the national Teamsters are behind this local. Like they're not gonna run out of resources. They're not gonna fucking quit. So it's just so like, it's one of those things like, cause I can come on here and talk all the time about how cops defend Capitol, not people. And everybody I think who's been to any protest knows that, but it's it's one thing to say it. And then it's another thing for you to go, it's like, I don't even have to say it. That's the thing. Like I go and talk to the workers and they're all saying it themselves. Like, like when you experience this stuff for yourself, it's like, I don't even have to do agitation. They're seeing the class struggle play out in real time as they're part of it. So
Yeah.
anyways,
As is expected.
yeah, all this to say, fuck the police. All support Teamsters Local 251 in their strike, which they are going to win against DHL.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, and on that absolutely correct and frankly uncontroversial statement, welcome to Work Stoppage, everybody, your favorite labor podcast. We're an entirely listener-supported show, so thank you so much for the support that you give us on Patreon. If you're not in the Discord, get in there. It's even cheaper than the Patreon, free 99, and we're taking off 99 cents, folks. If you are a patron and you don't have stickers yet, just message us on Patreon, and we will send them to you post-haste. And if you want to help the show a little bit more, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you think it will help. Leave a bad review of a scam app on the Google Play Store and mention our show.
That's right.
Always.
Yeah. So we're going to start this week with a happy follow-up for once. So folks, listeners will be aware that we've been covering this election that had been coming up in Louisville with the Heine Brothers Coffee Company, which is like a local chain in the area, largely centered in Louisville, but also the surrounding region. And they've been organizing with 32BJ SEIU to try and, join the big wave of organizing in the cafe industry that we've been seeing all over the country. And this past week, we got, really great news when we found out that they had won their union election. And unlike a lot of these places, aren't doing it store by store. This was across the whole chain. So this was like 17 different locations in the Metro Louisville area. And so in addition to the 3 unionized Starbucks that are in Louisville, there are now 20 unionized coffee shops in the greater Metro Louisville area, which fucking rules. And there might be some new ones coming up soon because there's another local chain, Synergos, which is also unionizing.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I'm kind of fascinated by the tactic of doing all of the stores in the city at once. Do you know if that was like a bargaining unit consideration that they hashed out, or if that was just something that they were able to do for another reason?
So the way that I understand the way that these drives happen is it's entirely up to the workers. They have gone out and they've organized at all of these different locations. They they said, hey, we've got this support across all of the different restaurants. And so when they filed for their election and they sent their petition into the NLRB, basically they said, hey, we want all of the stores included. And then, I don't remember if this was the case, but usually the company would then be like, oh no, you have to do each store individually, which usually it would be the opposite, because if you were doing an individual store, they would be like, no, you have to do all the stores at once.
Right.
And so whichever one would be in the company's favor is going to be the one that they're going to try to push for. And obviously, the NLRB tends to actually rule on the side of workers in that particular like small detail, though usually bargaining units can sometimes shift a little bit. Like they might make warehouse workers be separate from this or that, or, depending on how compelling the company is to the state. But yeah, I'm almost certain that this is because those people have been on the ground in every single store. It's like Starbucks couldn't do that because there's 7,000 fucking stores.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they could do like, I don't know, all of the stores in one city at one time. But even then, I think because of the way that they've already done it store by store, there would be a little bit more of a contestation of that. So yeah, basically it's just they organize their asses off.
Yeah, and those citywide organizing efforts really, are spoken for by the results. They had 220 workers who voted across the chain, and they ended up winning 97-60, which is not exactly a landslide, but it's a pretty safe outcome. It does seem like they weren't really running much risk of losing this election.
Yeah, it's great to see that that tactical decision has paid off. Like seeing them come away with this win, and now actually, I think the thing that's really interesting, though, about that tactical choice to actually unionize all the stores is that now they're the second biggest cafe union in the country.
That rules so much.
After only Starbucks Workers United, which is, of course, obviously the largest one. And yeah, so now, we've discussed in the past, like the union busting that these workers faced before their vote. A lot of the same playbook as you see from the big companies. They had captive audience meetings. There was a store closure with the first store that had 100% union support. There was a retaliatory firing of a supportive manager. And yet, again, just like with so many of the Starbucks locations, they broke out all of these methods to smash the union drive, and it didn't work. So...
like when they ruin your fucking life, you are just like, you know what, fuck these people. We are going to be a union. That's just the kind of mentality of a lot of people organizing these days. Thank goodness.
And you see that from the workers themselves. You have Gammy Ray, who's a worker at the chain, who told Spectrum News 1 that, quote, winning this election means so much to all of us who have spent months organizing, talking to our coworkers, and bringing our friends and coworkers together to fight for something bigger than ourselves, but that we will all benefit from. We owe so much to the generations of undervalued workers and the union organizers who came before us, and we are honored to carry on this fight in their honor.
Hell yeah.
And, that's a really eloquent statement.
I think that is more class conscious than we see even some of the, some other unions bring up. There's obviously like the, we can't do this without all of you statements that we've heard from unions, but also like to recognize like the people who have labored without, decent conditions, and even the people who had tried to organize before. I think that is a really, really awesome sentiment to be acknowledging. And if they're really building their struggle around that like historical precedent, I think that would be another indicator as to why they won.
Sure. Well, and contrast it to what the company is saying, which is they're like, okay, if you win the election, we'll honor it. And then they add, quote, we look forward to putting this election behind us. Shut up. Are you a child? Fuck you.
Yeah. Oh, well, and also that's them being like, oh, well, let's quick get to bargaining because we got to figure out this labor peace situation and forget that we just totally repressed all of your coworkers and friends and, just, give us a break. It's the appeal to the second chance thing. That they're going to be using there.
Yeah, it's like, hey, everybody, everything's going great, right? Hey, you'd have just weird about all that, like retaliatory firing and closing of stores, and it's all water under the bridge, right?
Yeah, you got us. You won. Who wants a pizza party?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the workers are now focused on, bargaining for their first contract, which will, as we've discussed, is probably going to be another long fight, but I've just been encouraged by the fact that not only did these folks just, after a few months of organizing, put together the second largest cafe union in the country, but the fact that part of the reason I mentioned that there's that other chain in Louisville that is unionizing, Synergos, is that speaking to the class consciousness, of the workers involved in this, in a lot of their media, that's how I found out about it, was them not just being like, hey, we won, great for us, we're the best, which would be fine as a sentiment, but also being like, and there's these other folks that are also unionizing, and we want to like, bring this to other chains all over the place, and the understanding that it's like, this only works if we unionize everyone. And that's been really, really encouraging to see. So, definitely, looking forward to these folks winning a really great first contract.
Yeah, none of that mistaken, like, some people need a union.
Right,
No, everybody needs a fucking union.
That's right.
Right. Well, as long as we're talking about the effects of real collective action, let's talk about 6,000 teachers who hit the picket line September 7th in Seattle, and delaying the start of the school year for 50,000 students across the Seattle school district. So these teachers have gone on strike. Relevant to some issues that are very similar to the problems we've seen in basically every school across the country: insufficient staffing, particularly in programs like special education and multi-language learning. And it's not listed, but I have to imagine things like arts and social sciences are under attack as well. Both the district and the union agree on changes to be made to those programs to improve learning for students, but the district also wants to expand programs without any additional staff, which is just understaffing, but doing it a different way.
It's labor intensification.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like reading about this was just one of those things that I can totally see how, like, I could see how this would happen in a meeting. Like, how
They're so progressive.
Yeah, because you'd be like, these teachers come to the table and they're like, we really need to revamp our special education and, multilingual education. Like, we're not serving these students with enough of the resources that they need, and we really need to expand these programs and redesign them to make them more effective. And the school's like, yes, we agree, you're totally right. And then everybody sits there for a second like, why did you agree with us? And then they drop the other shoe of like, we absolutely agree, you should retool those programs with no additional resources whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the school district's basically saying, like, we'll agree to anything except more pay, better benefits, or hiring more staff.
Yeah.
Anything else is fine with us.
Yeah, you can do all these changes with no resources, which is impossible, but we're happy to verbally support you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like,
More or less.
special education teacher Alicia Nikas told Liberation News, we're out here because we want a contract that reflects the needs of our students and the effort and workload of our staff. The district has come together with a task force with Seattle Education Association representatives, and they have recommendations for special education that I think are really important. But the district doesn't seem to understand that to roll out a new and inclusive, expansive special education and multi-language learner system takes an investment. It's not a discount or a budget cut. And the concern is how they are going to look at it. This is a real workload increase. It's a collaboration increase. And frankly, it needs to be a staffing increase. And that's where the hangup is.
I mean, this really stings to hear because, like, teachers are very much like a lot of other jobs we talk about, like nurses, already criminally understaffed across the entire country. But then when you add the fact that these are special education teachers we're talking about, they are in particular, even among teachers, woefully undersupported and understaffed. And, a lot of people will say like, oh, special education teachers already have smaller class sizes than other teachers. But it's like in a special education environment, you're tailoring the education very particularly to individual students on a very one-to-one basis. It's like you need really, really small class sizes to make sure that those teachers are giving those kids the best opportunities.
Well, and they wouldn't want to do that. I mean, the system is inherently ableist in that way. I mean, there's no way
That's
that
true.
they would want to invest in the lives of these people that they deem to be undeserving.
Yeah, I mean, so much of, like, I think the way that school administrations, not attributing this to any individual, but just like a systemic level, views special education in the American education system is more of as like a way to warehouse what they have deemed as like disruptive kids. And therefore, it's thought of as like, oh, this is just like daycare instead of education, which is, of course, bullshit, doesn't help anybody, and just ends up harming these kids that are absolutely capable of learning. They just need a curriculum geared towards them, as anyone does, since everybody has different methods of learning. And so I think it's really important that, these teachers are out there not just caving on this stuff and are like, we want to give the best possible education to these students, but we need to have the resources to do it. And the school administration is refusing to do it. And like the union points out the numbers for how bad this is on their website, where they say 93% of us are working more than our assigned or contract hours, and 25% of us are working 10 plus additional hours a week. We must incentivize Seattle Public Schools to reduce workloads and hire additional staff to reduce caseloads.
And I mean, like, especially in the face of inflation, I mean, they're not getting the raises are not gonna. I mean, they're basically going to take pay cuts in the face of this labor intensification.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things where, we see with the because we talk about inflation, and of course that's sort of treated as this amorphous force of nature. But like the broader like cost of living crisis is only compounded in major metropolitan areas because everything's already more expensive there. And so when everything then proceeds to get even more expensive, it just piles up on people at the bottom of the income ladder. And so like there's so many issues that are vital here. But I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated about this strike is that, we see this every time there's a teacher strike. The way that the media and right-wing politicians, which includes a lot of Democrats, tend to try and attack the teachers during the strike is they try to basically say that they're abandoning the kids by not teaching. They're like, come on, these kids have already suffered through years of pandemic learning loss. I mean, you've heard all these talking points. But one of the things that really, I think, helps counter that here is that immediately, even before the strike actually kicked off, the Seattle Student Union issued a statement in total solidarity with the workers, saying, as student leaders in the Seattle Public Schools District, we unequivocally support the Seattle Education Association's demands and decision to strike. We urge Seattle Public Schools to come back to the bargaining table and engage in good faith negotiations. And that rocks.
Getting them early. You love to see it. Hell yeah.
Yeah, because...
Well, and it helps fight back against the thing that you were just talking about, which you see in like a lot of different areas of the economy. Like I was watching some mainstream press coverage of the looming freight strike, and they were saying things like the companies will be forced to pass on these costs to consumers. And it's like you can't pit the consumers against the rail workers, and you see that on display here. It's like the kids who you could consider the quote unquote consumers of the school are standing against this, and the parents who are the other potential candidates for who's a consumer in a school environment are also standing against this, because the Seattle Times interviewed multiple parents who said that despite the disruption that the strike was causing, they didn't blame the teachers. Karen Rains, who has 3 kids in school affected by the strike, told the Times, quote, "I think they deserve everything and more," which is like, way to fucking go, Karen.
That's right.
No shit.
Damn, the rare good Karens.
Right?
Finally.
Well, I mean, of course they would have to be in support of a union. I mean,
that's
like,
right.
Otherwise, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that joke.
But yeah, like, I mean, it's great to see that, you've got the teachers, the students, and at least a decent chunk of the parents united behind the demands that the teachers are making. Because, like, I mean, we talk about how community is important to win any strike. But I think when it comes to like public workers broadly and teachers even more specifically, it's just because of how invested, understandably, a parent is going to be in the education of their kids, and of course how invested the kids are in their own education. It's so important to have those groups on the same page if you're going to stare down the local or state government, especially when, as we see in a bunch of states, including Washington State, where these public workers do not technically actually have the right to strike. Because, like, while traditionally, I guess in recent history, the state government has not actually invoked this like provision within their law, but there isn't actually any right to strike for public workers in Washington. So it is possible that the school district could take the union to court and try and get an injunction ruling the strike illegal. So the press that I've read from the area doesn't seem to think that that's particularly likely. But if the strike goes on for a long time and becomes acrimonious, I think that possibility will increase, because if there's one thing we have found employers love to do, it is weaponize the court system against their employees.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like, this is also, we've talked about this so many times of, like, what does it mean to be on an illegal strike? It
Right.
means what are the repercussions?
Right.
And so by looking at it this way, they really are seeing this quote-unquote illegal strike the way that it is as something that they can surmount to at least some extent. And so, you know, I guess it's really good that they're taking that into consideration.
Yeah. So, I mean, so far, I would have to say, I mean, the teachers have stayed strong. They the first couple of days of the school year have already been canceled because of this, including, you know, obviously we're recording this on Monday, September 12th. And as of today's, the strike is still on. Again, teacher strikes don't tend to last that long. So I would imagine we'll probably see a resolution this week. But the fact that the students and the community are behind them, I think gives them a little more protection from the possibility of the state coming in and being like, actually, this strike's illegal. You have to go back. Not totally, because we don't live in a real democracy, but it makes it more potentially risky for the local politicians to try that. So,
well, and also, I mean, luckily, the way that they've gotten all this community support, the school district has not been able to levy the strike being at the beginning of the school year against them, saying, "Oh no, we're just doing teacher development," or this or whatever other bullshit. Because when we talked about the core workers strike of 2012, they waited until the second week because they knew that the district was going to try to pull that shit. But I think that with the coordination of the Seattle teachers, they didn't actually have to worry about that and were able to strike right there on the first week without those particular repercussions.
Yeah, so solidarity with these teachers. I mean, it's so wild to see people argue that like their demands are unreasonable. It's like they want you to devote resources to special ed. And you're going to call them what, greedy? Like, come the fuck on. So anyways, I hope they win everything that they're asking for, because what they're asking for is really the bare minimum. So
yeah, well, and teachers in this country have been through a really, really long slog over the last few decades, honestly, in terms of just having their conditions worsened. And speaking of people who have gone through a long slog to accomplish something, let's talk about the Google cafeteria workers who have been organized in a massive multi-year-long union drive by Unite Here since 2018. And in that time, the union has organized over 4,000 workers at Google, constituting 90% of the company's food service staff, which is part of their broader goal of unionizing support staff all over Silicon Valley. And we've actually reported on this a couple of times. I think the first time we mentioned it was over a year ago at this point, because this has just been such a massive and long-standing drive. So Google has tens of thousands of support workers, cooks, servers, sanitation staff, drivers, security guards, and a large percentage of those who work at Google do not work directly for Google. Like much of the tech industry, Google operates on a two-tiered model with very highly paid software engineers directly employed by the company, while thousands of clearly vital workers are just contractors working for staffing agencies. And these workers, unsurprisingly, make far less on average and have far fewer benefits. And it's for that reason that Unite Here has targeted them for the last several years of organizing.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, support staff are some of the most frequently underappreciated and overexploited workers in any industry, especially, I mean, with this kind of multi-tiered status that Google is using. And I mean, this I don't think is in our notes, but I think that it was the board ruled recently that there was an obligation to bargain when indirectly employing workers. Is that on? I don't know if it's on national. We'll probably bring that into the next episode. But so hopefully there is also some additional rules coming up from the NLRB that's going to actually force Google themselves to bargain with some of these workers.
The joint employer rule reclassification that they've
yeah.
I'm not sure if this would apply here, but it could, and that would be really interesting, because if they could make Google the joint employer with the contracting service, I mean, in this case, United Here's already organized around 90% of the Google workers, but if you can apply that might make it easier for them to break into some of the other like big tech companies like, Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, who also have, thousands and thousands of these contracted support workers, and being able to put them into one bargaining unit, like by making the tech company the joint employer, that could potentially, make it easier than having to do a shop by shop drive. But I'm not sure if that rule applies here. We'd have to look into that more. But
yeah, but also I think this highlights the the need, and I kind of alluded to this, the need to first unionize these people who are actually at the bottom of the totem pole. Because so often people are like, "Oh, when are the engineers going to finally stand up and have a union?" And like, yeah, there's still the alphabet workers union, like Solidarity Union, but it's not like a strong, possibly rank and file union like this particular drive created.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so impressive about this drive is that they actually put in this work, like 5 years of organizing work to get these thousands and thousands of workers at 23 different Google offices all over the country. And yet, I mean, up until this report from the Washington Post, I mean, we've touched on it like a couple of times, but it hadn't hit this quite of a scale yet. And yet, other than this Washington Post report, it hasn't gotten a lot of discussion, despite the fact that, that 4,000 workers is not that far off from the scale of, say, like what Starbucks Workers United has unionized. Granted, they've done that in, 9 months, not 5 years. But like, this is a very big win because, I mean, everybody that we've ever talked to about the tech industry who's ever worked in it at all points to the problem of the 2-tier work system. But the level of exploitation, being faced by so many of these support workers is just through the roof. And like, for instance, recently the Unite Here has been expanding their organizing drive to Google offices in the South, hoping to bring the cafeteria staff at, like, for instance, Google's office in Atlanta, who are employed by the contracting firm Sodexo, into the fold as union workers. And this is, of course, as we talked about, like, in the South, you got right to work laws, you got hard right-wing governments, and a whole lot of issues that make it difficult to organize there. But they've been able to, with this long, slow organizing campaign, they've been able to still make inroads. And on Friday, September 2nd, Sodexo actually reached a neutrality agreement with Unite Here, pledging not to oppose the union, basically allowing them to go through card check, saying that if you get a majority of the workers to sign cards, we'll voluntarily recognize the union. Which that would be a huge win because, like, the union being in Unite Here has already made a big difference materially for so many of these Google cafeteria workers. Like, at the jobs at the Atlanta facility right now, working for Sodexo, workers make $15 an hour, which for Georgia,
nothing.
For Georgia is higher than a lot of other jobs, but it's still not a living wage. I mean, it's one of those things that, how many places have we talked about where they pay a shit wage, but their shit wage is slightly higher than everybody else in the areas, so they act as if they're like doing you a favor by giving you that job. But the other thing that comes with this is not only are they only making $15 an hour, they also have really high health insurance premiums. Whereas at the cafeterias that Unite Here has unionized, the average pay for workers is $24 an hour, which is 60% higher than the workers are currently making. And they pay little to nothing for their healthcare premiums. So,
oh, yeah, but they got to pay those nasty dues.
yeah, oh, man. We'll talk about that in the next story that we're about to hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was an example here, which I just thought was so great because they talked to this worker, Richard Ramirez, who works at Google's office in Seattle. And this is one of the things I really liked about this because he was not immediately a super pro-union worker. He's basically like, look, we're making $20 an hour. Yeah, I have to commute really long to get into the city, and that sucks because I can't afford to live in the Seattle area. But $20 an hour is better than most of these other places, so I don't know. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to risk losing my job, which is, you can understand that attitude. It's a bit wrong-headed, but you can get, like, again, we're conditioned to think that way. It's totally understandable to be in that headspace. Mm-hmm. And so he was not initially a big union supporter, but since his office voted for the union, he's seen huge benefits. Like, he now makes $27 an hour. So, I mean, that's huge. That's like a 35% pay increase just from winning the union election.
That's close to making overtime all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. On top of that, he said that he also went from paying for health insurance to not having to pay for health insurance.
Absolutely, which is so huge.
So
Yeah,
That's
and I mean, he
enormous.
literally said, "quote Since we unionized, I've bought a home, and that was basically only possible because we unionized." End quote. And so,
it's
like,
that classic story of, oh yeah, one year we got rocks, and the next year we got bicycles. Tell your dad that the year we got bicycles was the year we got the union.
yeah,
You know?
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, this drive is fantastic. Like, excellent work by Unite here, and it's just, I do think, to your point though, that what we were talking about, Lena, about the misconceptions I think a lot of folks have about who works in the tech industry, because I think a lot of people are like, the tech industry, that's just software engineers, as if you could run a company that only consists of software engineers.
Yeah, it's just 16 coders playing ping pong for 40 hours a week, and that's how software gets
Right.
made.
I'm like, yeah, that would definitely, I'm like, literally a week into that, the like place would turn into like Lord of the Flies, with nobody cleaning the office. Nobody would know how to get, you'd have food wrappers everywhere. It would be a disaster.
Put down a nice fresh layer of Taco Bell wrappers.
Yeah. And that's not to throw shade at the software engineers, but it's just like,
No, it is.
I mean, well, a little bit, but like, but also it's just like, it takes more people to run a company than just software engineers.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is so important about this is that obviously I think the pitch to workers that are more exploited like this is a little easier for like why you need a union, where somebody may be making six figures, even if they are still being extremely exploited, which most software engineers are. Because that's the thing. Like, when you compare pay rate to the profit rate at so many of these companies, that rate of exploitation is very high, even if the wages are also high.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's literally the exact same phenomenon we see where a guy is like, I'm a welder and I make $25 an hour, and if you give burger flippers $18 an hour, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, you should get $35 an hour then. We're not trying to stop you from getting a pay raise, dude.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, like, because the amount of money that the workers make for the company is hundreds, if not thousands of dollars an hour, and they're getting, maybe including benefits, $40.
right, which is why I think this drive is so helpful, because now what I would really hope is that the groups, maybe if they're affiliated with CWA, since they've been one of the most active in tech organizing, or even if it's an independent union like the Alphabet Workers Union, we need those groups to be working with Unite here, to be like, hey, look at what we got for the workers that are contractors. They're just as vital to this company, and we're all being exploited by the same tech overlords. And so it's important that we work together, because as we've seen, it's so many, like, how many places have we seen where for instance, like John Deere, you have the blue collar workers are organized and the engineers are not. And then when the blue collar workers go on strike, they try and use engineers as strike breakers. And that usually doesn't really work very well. But those sorts of divisions can make, that sort of worker solidarity harder. And so I think it's so important that if we're going to see this stuff be really successful, that we start seeing the tech workers and the support workers coming together, if not in the exact same union, then in a coalition that works together. Because that's the way that we're eventually really going to be able to get workers the wages, the benefits, the working conditions that they really deserve, is by tech workers and the support staff fighting together.
Yeah, well, and when you have those kinds of connections between unions or groups within unions, you get things like solidarity strikes, solidarity actions like slowdowns, or, concerted, like taking time off all at the same time, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a lot of different things you can do when you are plugged into each other's organizing apparatuses in that way.
100%.
Yeah. Well, and to shift gears a little bit, we're going to be moving to target workers, which we've historically been covering the drive in Virginia, which is still, we are going to hear more from that in the future. But workers in Pueblo, Colorado have actually begun their union drive and have announced that their union exists.
Yeah, this is very exciting to see. This is from a report out of the Pueblo Chieftain, where 3 weeks ago on August 18th, workers at this store in Pueblo at the Dillon Drive location started handing out union cards as a first step towards, potentially filing for an election. So this is really exciting. This is a little bit different than the drive in Virginia, just because the fact these workers are organizing with UFCW, Local 7, instead of the IWW. But I mean, it's the same company. It's pretty much the same issues. Like, the Target's out here bragging about their industry-leading wages of $15 an hour. And also, the rampant mishandling of COVID, which is a problem everywhere, but in the service sector is especially bad. Like, workers have reported that because the company basically just stopped telling workers when their coworkers got sick with COVID, that's just led to huge outbreaks at the store. And at one point this July, there were 15 workers out at once with the virus because of the fact that the management just refuses to tell anybody anything. So,
I'm sure that a lot of people have experienced that in their workplaces as well. I mean, whether, on the scale of a Target with 15 workers being out on a particular day or week, that's pretty significant. I mean, if you were in a smaller shop and there were 3 people gone, that might totally fuck up your whole week.
For sure.
So I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that.
Yeah. And I mean, just speaking to the issue of the supposed leading wages, like one worker told the Pueblo chieftain, quote, people who have worked there 18, 20, or 30 plus years that are barely making a little over a team member that is just starting. Because again, this is the problem. Even if the starting wages are, I guess, maybe a little better than some of the other places, that doesn't mean much if there's no way to go up from there. Like if you've been working there for 20 years and you make $19 an hour, well, that $15 an hour starting wage doesn't really mean that much.
Yeah, well, and I mean, if they went from, say, $12 to a $15 starting wage, that $3 raise isn't seen by any of the legacy workers.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and then in addition to that, in parallel to basically every other workplace in the country, Target has also used the pandemic as an opportunity to embrace lean staffing, which means that in addition to not paying their workers who have been there for a long time more money, they're laying people off and firing them more and hiring less, which is just lowered staffing causes just as many fucking problems as regular overworked staff or underpaid staff. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so unsurprisingly, since they became aware of the union drives, Target has deployed, the standard union busting playbook. As we've talked about on the show a few times, Target, despite being a gigantic company, doesn't have any union stores for a reason. They are very aggressive about their union busting. So, the staff have these morning huddles where they get together and they do their announcements and set out goals or whatever, the morning managerial meeting, basically. And they have been using those much like managers at the Virginia store did, to spread lies to workers about unions, telling them, and this is kind of to what you were saying earlier, John, telling them that, if you join a union, you could have to pay $900 a year in dues.
Okay, two things to say about that. One, no, you won't. And 2, that's not that much.
Yeah.
If you get a 35% raise, $900 a year isn't even going to be a significant fraction of that.
Yeah, it's literally less than $20 a week. But it's also not, that's not, UFCW has not announced that as the dues.
Right.
So they're just making that number up. And I'm sure they have some look, we found a UFCW contract from a completely different state in a completely different business. And that's what the dues are, even though it has nothing to do with, this bargaining unit.
Yeah, I'd love to know where they got that number, like a Zillow mortgage calculator or something.
Yeah, they could be comparing that to workers who make $100,000 a year.
Right. Exactly. Right. And of course, breaking out that standard, well, if you unionize, we just won't be able to have the same relationship. You won't be able to talk to a manager without a union representative present, which first off, I'm just I don't think that's the threat.
That's not true.
I'm I don't think that's the threat that you think it is, because I don't want to talk to my manager without a union rep present. And also, B, yeah, as you said, it's also just not true.
Yeah, because having Weingarten rights does not actually mean you have to invoke them. It just means that you should.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with like so many things about the union, every time they try and say something scary about it, it's like, don't threaten me with a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, you mean you won't be able to just come over and tell me I now have to work the same job as the guy you just fired and the job I was already doing? Oh, damn,
Right.
that sounds terrible. But yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're not going to pull me into a meeting that's just me and two other managers and
Right.
be real, like, fucking classist or ableist or fucking probably likely racist as well in the disciplinary functions that are going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's as annoying and shitty as these tactics are, they are kind of to be expected. And, of course, they're holding captive audience meetings, one-on-ones, all the sorts of things that we usually see. And to the point that the workers at the Pueblo store are already considering filing unfair labor practice charges against the store for their tactics, especially as we now know the current NLRB is at least sympathetic to the argument that any captive audience meetings are themselves unfair labor practices. And there was one anecdote from this that I could not leave out of this story, which is just because I'm like, this is so cliche that we have done multiple memes about it in the meme review, which is after they heard about the union drive, managers suddenly had a day where they're like, oh, you know what? We got to thank you all for all the hard work you're doing. Here's a sheet cake we got that says thank you for all you do on it. Like
a sheet cake.
They literally did I know you say you want a union, but have you considered sheet cake?
Yeah, the whole food thing is really condescending in so many ways. I mean, pizza in its own right is only available to like people who don't have dairy restrictions or other sorts of dietary restrictions. Cakes being like, a issue for people with diabetes. I just think.
Well, and
I don't know. It's just so insulting.
It's also a type of condescending where it's like, do you think workers can't go to Costco by themselves?
Yeah, it's like, do you think that the workers who you are paying dog shit wages don't know how cheap a sheet cake is? Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, it's early stages of the union drive here at this store in Pueblo. So, I wouldn't anticipate, an NLRB election tomorrow, but it's definitely very encouraging because Target has been, like Walmart, like Amazon, one of those nuts that has been really tough for unions to crack because of the really high turnover rate and the really aggressive union busting that they do. So the fact that, they rolled out this whole campaign in Virginia to try and crush the union there, which is still ongoing, and yet because of how bad the conditions are, you still are going to have workers bringing this up because it's like you can union bust all you want. That doesn't solve the fundamental contradiction. So it's really encouraging to see this going on, and it'll definitely be one to watch because if they can pull it off, I mean, the first union target, that would be an enormous win, a huge step in the labor movement. So we will definitely be following this one going forward.
Yeah. And in another pivot, we're going to be talking about video effects workers who are unionizing against absolutely horrid conditions. I mean, like, you might not realize this, actually you probably do. Literally everything in TV and movies these days is visual effects. There are green screens and motion capture suits for literally everything. I mean, you could.
Well, I just saw the trailer for the new live action Little Mermaid movie, and I remember looking at it and thinking like, "Wow, look at all that money." And then I read this story, and I was like, "Actually, no, they don't pay these people fucking anything."
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, I think part of it because it's become. I'm almost cliche at this point to complain about the amount of CG that is constantly used now in fucking everything in Hollywood. But a big part of the problem there is not entirely that everything is CG, although you can get into a whole film theory thing about whether that's good or not. It's that you're getting bad CG because they don't pay the VFX workers anything, and they run them absolutely ragged. So this is coming out of a really interesting report in The Guardian, because we covered last year a decent amount about the really tough conditions faced by workers in the film industry when we were covering the potential for a strike by IATSE, which is, of course, the union that represents the vast majority of, I believe, what is usually termed below the line production workers. So you've got your sound folks, your lighting folks, your production assistants, all the folks that make the movies actually happen. Except,
a movie isn't just 5 actors and a director playing ping pong for 8 hours.
Right. and so, but there's a big exception there, which is that the workers who make all of the visual effects are not part of that union.
Right.
Which, of course, means that all of the production companies are like, ooh, cheap labor. Let's exploit that as much as we possibly can. And like one of the workers that the Guardian interviewed said, quote, "We are the only major department currently working on every film set in America that is not unionized, is not organized, and is not covered by the same general basic agreements and all that entails for every other person on that set. Every other department has sort of built-in safeguards for everything because there's an entire system in place to protect people from being taken advantage of." And not only is that true, the results of it are pretty tough. Because even the workers in IATSE, as we described last year, can face some pretty tough conditions just because of how the culture in filming is now. It's basically like, even if you're union, you're working 12, 14-hour days because you've got this super compressed schedule and you got to get the shots out. But because you have a union, you've got good benefits, you've got good wages, you've got a real career, you've probably even got a pension. Whereas these workers are working those conditions with none of that protection whatsoever. Extreme overwork is incredibly common in the industry. And unlike the rest of the workers, they're not getting the same wage material benefits from it. Workers told The Guardian that they face 18-hour days, including having to sleep in their office without any of the wages and job protections that a union contract would offer. And that is what has prompted so many of the workers in visual effects to start a movement literally just called the Visual Effects Union to try and bring these workers into IATSE alongside the rest of the production workers.
Well, and this is long overdue. I mean, one thing that I've read about is video effects and video editing and production generally. To get into that industry itself is basically doing a ton of free work.
Yeah.
The way that you get any sort of resume is cutting videos for internet people and doing tons of work for free just so that you can get any sort of credibility so that you can maybe one day work 18 hours and have to sleep in the office.
Right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. And it's funny because I was just watching last night a documentary about Phil Tippett, who is this legendary stop motion artist who, he worked on all the original Star Wars movies. He's worked on a million. He did all the creature designs for Starship Troopers. And one of the things that he talked about in that movie was after they did Star Wars was trying to figure out, he's like, well, I do this stuff and it's great and I love doing it, but we don't have a union. So how do we even have normal working conditions like all the other production workers? And so that went into this whole history. But that was something that I was just, after reading this story, I was just like, man, this has been a problem. This is not just new because there's so much CGI going on. This is a multi-decade long problem. And it's really good to see that this happening, but it's one of those things that I'm just I feel like it should just be obvious to almost everybody who is in the industry. It's why aren't these people in IATSE? They clearly should be. It doesn't make any sense that they're not. But obviously, of course, the studios love it. They love that they can, hyper exploit these workers. They can make them work insane hours that nobody can do while paying them dog shit. And so, of course, they're going to push back against it. But this, per this article in The Guardian, there's been a lot of interest along a lot of these big production studios. And, IATSE, of course, themselves are working with these folks to try and bring these workers into the union. So, this is setting up to be a pretty decent, contract fight to try and bring these workers in because, I mean, as more and more productions in Hollywood rely more and more and more on visual effects, these workers only become a larger and larger percentage of the vital workers needed to pump out everything that Hollywood produces. And so, it's really important that they get brought into IATSE. And so it's very good to see that there's a real solid push being made now. And so we're definitely going to be watching it to see when they actually get to that point where they hit critical mass and they can try and have an election, because this is a really big hole kind of in that union environment that's otherwise been one of the few strongholds of union activity in the U.S.
Absolutely. And we're going to be talking about, other people who I guess tend to work in California. The video effects workers tend to work in California. These workers definitely work in California. So Amazon workers in Modesto, California, have decided to affiliate with the Amazon Labor Union, expanding the ALU drive to the ONT8 facility. The union held press conferences saying that they were affiliating with the ALU. About 100 workers gathered to celebrate the news on Friday the 9th, with Chris Smalls in attendance. So Chris Smalls said at the time, "Today we're bi-coastal. This is something that's really going to continue to grow, just like Starbucks." Then workers at the warehouse are basically organizing for the same issues that we've been talking about at so many Amazon facilities, whether it be wages being a problem, no benefits, the incredibly dangerous working conditions, the constant firings based on whatever arbitrary metrics Amazon has come up with this 6-month period, this quarter, because, every single quarter they got new intensifications that they're trying out to make everybody's lives fucking miserable.
Yep. So you have one of the workers, Nanette Plasencia, who's been leading the organizing effort on the ground, who told the LA Times, quote, "I've been there for so long that I gained a lot of friendships there, and a lot of my friends were hurting. Right now, we break our back for nothing. After this, they'll have so much." So she originally founded a group, United for Change, ONT8, at the start of the pandemic, trying to advocate for safer working conditions. But after seeing the success of the ALU in New York, reached out to join their movement instead, saying, quote, "They felt us. They felt our pain. Only people who work in Amazon are going to know how it really is and what you really need to do. You got to think outside the box with Amazon because they're a different breed. You can't be conventional with them." And I think that that's a really, astute observation, because people have been saying since the ALU's initial success that it was due in large part to their what would be now considered relatively unconventional organizing methods, although they were popular at one time, that they actually got to that point in the first place.
Yeah. And so I actually just thought one of the parallels here with JFK was very interesting because Chris Smalls originally started organizing around safer working conditions during the beginning of the pandemic. That's what he got fired for. And out of that grew, the Congress of Essential Workers and then into the Amazon Labor Union. And so you have the same thing here where Nanette Plasencia here, she started a group to try and do the same thing and then saw, hey, what those folks in the ALU are doing makes a lot of sense. And I think we should hook up with them on that. And so this is great because even though, we've seen some failures by Amazon in their attempts in court to try and delay the certification of JFK-8. The biggest strength that we're going to be able to give the ALU to actually be able to survive the anti-union onslaught is expansion. By having it go, because the second vote in Staten Island didn't go so well, but now they've got affiliates in Kentucky, in Albany, and now here in Modesto. So, in addition to obviously wanting these individual elections to go through for the workers at those locations, it's also so important to get those second, third, fourth unionized locations because it makes it much harder to crush the, that union movement when it's at multiple locations. So, this drive is just, they're really kind of just getting started here. They hope to hit a critical mass and file for a official election next year. But of course, we've already gone through so many times the union busting campaign that Amazon is sure to roll out here. So I would expect this will be a long fight, but very welcome news to see the ALU expanding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and staying in California, we're going to be covering a new bill that has been passed in the state government, which creates a fast food council, which is, out of the Fast Recovery Act, FAST in all caps, where basically the state is saying fast food workers need additional supports. And so they've created this kind of board, which is going to be comprised of 10 different people appointed by the governor and some of the other states' representatives, where, there are going to be 4 worker representatives, 2 presumably actual workers, 2 most likely worker representatives like a union representative, and then 4 people from Capitol and 2 people from the state, which, I think that my analysis of this is that it's good, but it's also very much so in that same vein of like the neutrality agreement with Microsoft, in that we really should take this with a big grain of salt.
Well, and to explain to folks like what this board is for, because traditionally one of the things that's been one of the biggest hurdles for unions and workers trying to unionize in the fast food sector has been the franchise system. Because except for a very short period, like with the NLRB under Obama, where there was a temporary period where they had what we were talking about before. They had the joint employer rule, which made it a little easier to organize workers across multiple locations with different franchise owners, but under the same corporation. It's traditionally been very difficult to organize in the fast food industry. I mean, that's why pretty much the only union fast food places are like Burgerville in the Northwest, who are organized by the IWW, and that took like 5 years. And the very recent Chipotle union in Lansing, Michigan, which is very cool. But so what this board is basically aiming to do is essentially try and resolve some of the worst exploitative conditions within the fast food industry by sort of, rather than trying to make it easier to unionize, which I think we would be a bit more unambiguous in our support for, it's instead creating this sort of regulatory board that is empowered to impose minimum standards on the fast food industry, specifically relating to things like, wages, benefits, hours, working conditions, that sort of thing. And so this bill has been, really strongly supported by unions, especially the SEIU in their Fight for 15 campaign. They specifically called the bill a, quote, watershed moment in the nation's labor history, giving more than 500,000 low-wage workers in the fast food industry a meaningful voice on the job, end quote. And so this is kind of viewed as like an alternative path to sectoral bargaining. Because like in the past, if you just had, it's like, here's McDonald's and they own, 2,000 locations in California or whatever, and they're all under the same company, you would try and organize the McDonald's workers unions. But with the issue with franchising, you now have 2,000 individual locations you have to go to, which is very, very time and resource intensive. And so this idea is, okay, the franchise system makes the traditional NLRA process very difficult. So what if we created a statewide board that had the ability to basically impose a lot of what we're trying to get with our union contracts, but to the whole industry entirely? And so, the bill theoretically allows the council to set higher minimum wages all the way up to $22 an hour, above the current minimum 15 in the state. They can also recommend things like requiring that all fast food places have to offer their workers mandatory sick time, other benefits. But I think one of the places where we're a bit cautious on this is that those are what the board can recommend. But as Lena was, describing, we don't know that's what the board will actually do, because only 4 of the board's 10 members are more or less assured to be in favor of those sorts of improvements for the workers. 4 of them are 100% guaranteed to be against any changes that are in favor of the workers. And the other 2, being direct employees of the state, doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that they're going to come out here and start advocating for a $22 an hour minimum wage for fast food workers, even if that's absolutely what they should have.
Yeah.
Well, and I imagine when I was first hearing about this is before I found out that, it was going to be weighted against the workers and entirely appointed by the state. I was like, well, if this is a board of 10 workers, why don't they just raise the wages to $22 an hour, give people a week or 2 weeks worth of sick time, and then, dissolve the board.
Right.
But obviously that's not what's going to happen. There's going to be like a real negotiation and labor struggle going on here where the workers are going to get probably a couple $1 an hour raise, maybe 2 sick days, and instead of coupons for nonstick shoes, free nonstick shoes.
Yeah. I mean, and the funny thing is, despite our reservations, any intrusion into the dictatorial power over the workplace that the franchise owners have is seen as a complete affront. There was a quote in the Washington Post from the International Franchise Association, which I'm just going to go ahead and declare them enemies of the show.
We have finally discovered something worse than an HOA.
Yeah, they called the bill a, quote, a fork in the eye to franchise owners and customers at a time when it hurts most, end quote.
Oh, won't you think of the poor franchise owners? Fuck off. Every time.
Oh, no, you forked
off.
me in the eye. I'll do it again.
Yeah, and so, we get the same refrain that we get every time. There's literally any regulation whatsoever saying this is going to drive many franchisees out of business, that the restaurants will have to pass on these increased costs to their customers, despite, again, millions of studies having shown that an increased minimum wage does not lead to a, massive rise in prices. That's a lie that is thrown out there by low-wage employers to try and force labor costs as low as they can. And so in response, the business owners in the International Franchise Association are already working hard to get a ballot measure on the 2024 ballot in California to basically do an end around of this legislation, in similar to how Uber and Lyft used that same process to get Prop 22 passed, even though that was then later ruled unconstitutional. But so they're already incredibly mad and trying to subvert this new law. So under their own new business front organization, Protect Neighborhood Restaurants, which
they're like, instead of the franchises, think of the small business owner. This is only gonna hurt.
Yeah.
What about the small fast food owners?
The neighborhood when I hear the term neighborhood restaurants, the first thing I think of is the fucking Burger King down the road, like
the Subway in the gas station.
Yeah, come on, who's gonna give a shit about
from
that?
the Burger King. Yeah.
So, anyways. Even with our reservations on this, because one of the things that I immediately thought of when I read about this is the way that in Germany, for instance, corporations are required to have worker representatives on the board, but they're always minority representatives. So they can always just get outvoted. So it's one of those things that I do have a bit of concern on, that it'd be like, oh, we did this through the state and it got us a couple of little teeny things, so we don't need to focus as hard on unionizing or real sectoral bargaining, when it's just like, that's the only thing that's ever going to permanently fix this, guys. So This is good. This is at worst, they don't pass anything and the situation remains the same. So, but more likely, I think they'll recommend some insufficient but still better conditions for workers. So if maybe they don't raise it to $22 an hour for the minimum wage, maybe they do $17 an hour. And it sucks that they're not going to where they should go. But I think as long as we are look, this is good, but it's not enough. We need more.
Yeah.
And that's why we need real unions. I think that's the orientation broadly that we're taking to this.
Well, and even then, I kind of alluded to the fact that they're all appointed by the governor and the state, and what I really wanted to point out there is that they can just go and handpick whichever union people are like, well, I guess similar to what we're going to cover in the next story, where they think that there can be such thing as a pro-union business.
Yeah. So. I guess just going right into the next story to what you're talking about, Lena. So we did a shop floor discussion a couple of months ago about CWA's neutrality agreement with Microsoft and how that was going to go. And so we broadly came away from it being very skeptical of it and concerned that it could lead to some less than wonderful consequences. But hopeful that maybe it would have some good outcomes. And so far, we have now gotten new word that it is, in fact, leading to bad outcomes, but not necessarily exactly how we expected. So this is coming out of a report from last week in the Intercept, where basically... So CWA is, of course, the union that is working to organize workers at Microsoft and, through things like a better ABK, trying to organize Activision. And we've talked about this a bunch with the organizing in the tech industry. And so last fall, before the neutrality agreement, a later National Labor Federation that CWA is affiliated with, UNI Global Union, hired an NGO to produce a report on Microsoft's and other tech companies' long history of working on military and intelligence contracts. The idea being that this is not publicized that much, and as part of their campaign, they could expose, look at this bullshit Microsoft is doing. They're working with ICE, they're working with whatever, just basically revealing all the various contracts that they're working on. However, once the neutrality agreement was announced, the CWA pulled their support and nixed the report, concerned that it could upset the new arrangement and kill future union drives at Microsoft, which is not the response you would want from a union. I mean, there's a bunch of quotes in this Intercept piece, but one of them from basically there's a lot of communications they have from UNI to this NGO. And one was, quote, because Microsoft came out and did what they did in terms of respecting workers' rights to organize, we cannot be associated with this paper and its release, end quote, which
stupid.
Yeah. Okay, if the report was stretching the truth or something, okay. But just being well, this information's all true and it's all bad shit.
But it's controversial.
Right. But we shouldn't be putting it out because what if Microsoft gets mad that we're associated with it? It's that does go to one of the things that we were concerned about with the neutrality agreement, which is that it encourages class collaborationist thinking, that labor and management can have the same interest, which they don't, and they never do, and they never will. And so thinking that way, we need to cover for the company because the company is letting us unionize, that is poison, that sort of thinking, because it is only going to walk you into the trap of complacency and is going to get you a union that is completely ineffectual. So
right. And I mean, this article that we're pulling from is written by Li Feng, who is definitely an anti-union ghoul.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is definitely meant to be a critique of CWA in unions are all bad. But, I mean, really what we're talking about here is the history of class collaborationism and the issues of it. I mean, one of the quotes that I found to be the most egregious was when an unspecified union official said, no one could have predicted Microsoft would seek to become a pro-union employer. That would have been flying pigs, I never would have predicted that. And that, in my opinion, is just indicative of that class collaborationist ideology. And so, fuck Li Feng, but also what the hell is going on with these people in these unions and their stupid class collaborationism?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a sentiment, and it's a liberal one, where it's are we really showing good faith with Microsoft if we critique them, if we support a perfectly legitimate critique of them that is completely, that their actions are completely heinous? And it's yeah, I think failing to support that good faith critique, that correct critique, is a show of bad faith, but not to Microsoft, but to the workers that constitute your union.
Exactly. And that's the problem. Because the article, I think, because of the author, goes further in the critique than I think is warranted. It essentially implies that the reason that the CWA quashed this is because they're worried about losing dues money from potential future unions, which I'm come on. You have a perfectly
idiot.
valid critique in here, and then they throw that shit in there to be see, unions are just out there to get your dues money. Unions are corrupt just like the government.
That's
It's no, shut the
ridiculous.
fuck up.
If this union was principled, they would release this as a damning piece of evidence that they need the union.
Right. And so that's the issue is that we're not saying that the CWA is an evil organization or anything. It's just that this sort of thing is extremely disappointing and frankly I think is damaging to CWA's efforts to organize in tech, because the thing is, tech workers have been fighting against these sorts of contracts, of their companies being involved directly in U.S. imperialism since before they were involved with the CWA. Like, we've seen walkouts at Google, we've seen walkouts at Amazon, we've seen walkouts, I think, even at Microsoft from tech workers before the CWA was involved in this. So the workers themselves want to know this stuff. And sure, some of them may be like, I don't care, I think this is fine. But like, it is fucked up to try and hide this information from the public eye, and more importantly, from the workers themselves, in order to try and like smooth your relationship with the employer, whose relationship you need to be thinking of as adversarial at all times, no matter what they tell you. And that's the issue.
I think there's a podcast who has a catchphrase about that. I don't remember what they're called.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come up with it later.
But yeah,
we'll figure it out. It'll come back to me in the shower.
I mean, look, we still really want to see more unions at Microsoft. With
Including
the CWA.
with CWA,
yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is not like if you're in the CWA union, throw up your union card because they did this. No, it's just that like in our pursuit of union democracy and for unions to be representative of the workers and actually for the workers, they can't be doing shit like this, and so we need to talk about it when it happens.
Well,
So,
I think what we would say is get in that fucking union and change it.
yes,
Like,
100%.
go in there and tell them that they're being silly. That this is a galldarn goofball activity.
That's right. So really what we're saying is we're not mad, CWA, we're just disappointed.
That's right.
yeah, come on.
So let's move with that to our weekly Starbucks segment, where we covered last week the Starbucks being forced to rehire the Memphis 7 and then immediately firing the 6 people in Anderson, South Carolina. Well, the appeal that Starbucks was attempting to do on the Memphis 7 firing, the U.S. 6th District U.S. Court of Appeals ruled on Tuesday, the 6th, that Starbucks' appeal would not show a likelihood of success, and thus, had a motion to delay the reinstatement of the workers denied, which basically means fuck you, Howard Schultz. Not even the court. Like, we kind of warned that the court might be it's one of the places that's less likely to end up with a pro-worker ruling, but in this case, I guess they said the NLRB said it, and that's final.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hearing from the workers, I mean, you have Nebretta Hardin, who's one of the Memphis 7, who said in a statement, quote, "It is a shame that we have to take this route to get our jobs back. We have proven once again that it is a protected right for workers to express how they feel about their workplace and how they can be better for us. We all can't wait to go back to work and show Starbucks that we have a right to be there, and we will continue to fight for our rights."
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And of course, despite being defeated in court yet again, they couldn't, leave it without a stupid, smarmy, like underhanded response where Starbucks put out this statement, which honestly I think is kind of an embarrassing statement to issue. I'm just like, just take the L, guys. Like, where they come out and they say, quote, "We are concerned that this ruling sends mixed messages to our partners about appropriate behavior in the workplace and sets a worrisome precedent for employers everywhere who need to be able to make personnel decisions based on their established policies and protocols," end quote.
Get
Hold on
radical.
a minute.
Get
Where's
radical. Just go out
Yeah.
there. The NLRB said it's fine. No, wait, don't do that. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean, they're so obviously wounded about this, and I just wish I had like a Nelson from The Simpsons ha-ha soundboard right now. Because like that's really how I feel. Just like cry about it, nerds. Fuck you.
Yeah, like it's just so ridiculous. It's like you're committing rampant union busting everywhere else. You lose one case and you still have to complain about losing it. Like, shut the fuck up and stop firing your workers. But yeah. So in addition to that, strikes have continued at Starbucks all around the country this week. Their workers at the 75 Mount Auburn Street location in Watertown, Massachusetts, began an indefinite strike of their own on Friday, September 9th, in addition to the 874 Com Ave store, which has been on strike for like 2 months, I think, now. And specifically the workers at the store in Watertown are protesting the retaliatory firing of 2 worker organizers and, to echo every story we talk about every week, the constant understaffing by management intended to force out other pro-union workers. So, again, as always, so good to see workers standing up against this stuff. I mean, we saw the coordinated, like 100 different sit-ins over Labor Day weekend. That was huge. There's been strikes all over the place. So, even as, Starbucks' union busting escalates and as like the pace of union elections slows down a bit, the pace of the workers standing up against that union busting and doing it in more and more organized fashion has not slowed down at all. And that's been really inspirational to see. And so, but moving into the election results, only had a few this week. Start with a unfortunate and really kind of sad loss where this one I was disappointed to see.
This one attacks Dan personally.
I was very excited to be like, hey, my state's finally on the board. I've gone over to that store once to be like, hey, I don't drink coffee, but I support your union drive. And so here in Rhode Island, there was one store that had filed for unionizing a while ago, and they finally had their election. This is in Warwick, which is just south of Providence. And they lost their election in a 9-9 tie, which first off, this just gets into something very important, which how the fuck does a tie go to the company? Like, the workers are the underdog in these elections 100% of the time. A tie should go to them. Like, so
I agree.
I mean, this sucks. It's very unfortunate, but, I'm sure that the workers there will, eventually be able to try this again. I mean, again, they came 1 vote short. There's no reason why in the future they won't be able to unionize or other stores in the area. So,
yeah, why does a fucking tie go to the house anyway? What is this, blackjack at a charity event? Come on.
I mean, it's just a very good illustration because that's the obvious example, right? The tie goes to the dealer thing, and it's just like, well, casinos are rigged. I wonder if this system that also does the same thing is also rigged.
Yeah, but also, I mean, my heart goes out to the workers there because that 100%. Store is going to become incredibly adversarial.
For sure.
Like I'm sure that there is going to be a deep disgust between the workers themselves with this particular loss.
Yeah. So, I mean, hearts go out to the workers at the Warwick store. Very unfortunate, but I am sure that there will be more filings in the area, and we will get Rhode Island on the board at some point. So, however, in addition to that loss, there have been multiple wins this past week, including 2 in New York, where workers at the Wantagh store on Long Island won their union vote 20-7. I think that was the first win on Long Island, although it's one of those things that I'm never sure because I'm not from New York. I'm like, does Brooklyn count as being on Long Island? Because like it physically is, but anyway.
Listener,
so
why don't you jump in the Discord and tell us because you always do.
Yeah. But so they won their union vote 20-7. And then on Wednesday last week, the first store on Staten Island to unionized. And they didn't just become the first store by a small margin. They unionized unanimously at the Forest Ave location, 15-0. In favor of joining the Starbucks Workers United movement, which is, again, still hovering around 235 unionized stores.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well,
more like Stanning Island, because we stand.
And with that joke, we're going to move directly into the meme review.
That's right.
With jokes made by professionals.
Yeah. This first one is a multi-panel comic in a way that we don't usually see multi-panel comics. So we have like a long panel and then a 3-panel and then a long panel and then a 2-panel. So in the top one, they have your basic description of what's going on. They point at this worker with a stick on his head and a carrot held to the end of it where the worker is the worker. The stick is profits, and real wages, a real wage rise is the carrot. And they've got 2005, where the carrot is kind of close, but the person is still not getting it. 2010, the carrot is slightly further away. The stick is getting longer. Profits are increasing. 2015, oh my gosh, the stick is really long. And then 2020, where it has gone so far as to be able to see a bigwig CEO smoking a cigar, just staring right at the carrot, and the worker is no longer reaching and is very exasperated. Then, I guess that was 2020. And then the 2022 is where the worker has broken the stick. The CEO is doing screaming pig face. And then 2023 is where all of the workers have gathered the sticks from the long broken stick and are chasing all of the cigar smoking CEOs. And we're seeing a little bit of a what we would call the cool zone of class struggle.
That's right. I don't know. I'm a big fan of this one. Like, I love that, like, the first panel where you've got the workers, like, it's got like a very encouraged, kind of like very cute expression, like, I'm going to get that carrot. And then as it gets further and further away, he's just like, hey, what the hell? And then eventually he just gets so incredibly fucking mad. And then just seeing like this horde of workers with like what look basically like yardsticks just chasing, the bigwigs in their pinstripe suits. Very good, high quality agitation stuff.
Yeah,
Hell
smash that profit and go on strike, and then I don't know.
And then go get a fucking hot dog.
Yeah.
Our next meme is of special interest to me, John, a guy who fucking loves hot dogs. But there's a few things in this world I like better than hot dogs, and one of them is unions. And it looks like the rest of America is finally catching up to my correct opinions because we have this meme from the Utility Workers Union of America, and it's a very professional looking meme, I must say. And it says across the top, labor unions now have a higher approval rating than hot dogs. Americans who approve of hot dogs, 70%. Americans who approve of unions, 71%. Eat shit, hot dogs.
I posted this, folks.
And so many people replied, damn, now I want a hot dog.
Hell yeah.
I actually made a hot dog after the first time I saw this.
I actually also the next day made sure that we do a fancy hot dog spread at my house sometimes where we have freshly cut up pickles and shredded cheese and chili and sauerkraut and nice mustard. And we do fancy hot dogs here in this house.
I will give hot dogs one thing over unions, which is that your employer doesn't usually pull out all the stops to prevent you from making a hot dog.
Unless it's a barbecue out on the strike line.
Well, that's the thing.
Right.
That's why you got to combine these things. I mean, to take a page from the ALU's book, when you're organizing your union, one thing that might attract people to want to talk to you is if you will give them free hot dogs.
That's true.
I was also just surprised to hear that 30% of Americans don't approve of hot dogs.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of get it. There's a lot of sayings about, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. And, then there's, regular vegetarians. And there's a few other factors.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see why you wouldn't like hot dogs. I mean, I eat every kind of... I eat fucking Vienna sausages. So there's no saving me.
Yeah. Well, and in something that we have been lucky to avoid throughout this entire episode, all the way up until now, I've got some bad news, folks. We're doing some Queen memes. This one is a DeShare Zone, almost certainly, although it's not tagged DeShare Zone.
It is. It's from DeShare Zone's account. This was by far my favorite of the the memes going around when the Queen died.
Yeah, so we're doing Dan's favorite and then my favorite. So Dan, I'll let you do yours.
So this one it's a classic Share Zone joint, very simple. You've got the picture of the Queen there in one of her goofy outfits, and you've got all this fire in the background, and of course a skeleton, and then it's just captioned with what I love that he put this in the sort of graphic that you would see on an insert advertisement in the newspaper for your local grocery store, where it's and it's just like, it's supposed to be this big happy text, and then it just says, world's biggest landlord down. And then at the bottom, get a real job next time.
It does look like a magazine or a newspaper insert, though. I kind of expect it to keep going like, this weekend at Holland Kia Sedona.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought you were gonna say an insert in like a DVD on the $5 rack at the checkout line.
I mean,
oh my god!
work.
Like, or you wake up in the middle of the night on a beanbag chair and there's a DVD menu just looping in front of you, but it's the Queen surrounded by skeletons in hell.
Well, I also like that we didn't put it in here, but like where somebody took like that picture of like the McDonald's kiosk and put like her face on it, like the morning message, and somebody's like, they have trapped the Queen's soul in the McDonald's kiosk. She is damned to serve burgers for all eternity.
Well, and then to move to mine, we have got this one where Death is playing the crane game, and Death is going, Queen Elizabeth II, is Henry Kissinger even in this thing? And I saw this, and it just led me to think that when Henry Kissinger dies, the U.S. is going to pop off. Like, there is going to be celebration in the streets. There is going to be a bigger celebration than we've seen from any other celebrity death. Any other fucking ghoul mass murdering asshole than we've seen, I don't know, in tens of years.
We got Shinzo Abe, we got Gorbachev, we got the Queen. I mean, he's due. Super due.
Telling my siblings' grandchildren, I remember the day Henry Kissinger died. 9/11/45. It was like the whole country won the Super Bowl all at the same time.
Oh, man.
And then this last one is one that I just liked.
Yeah,
John, you haven't read one. Did you want to do it?
I haven't read one yet, no, and I actually watched a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh!
Okay, I was going to ask. I was like, I think this is Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah. So you have what's his name, Seto Kaiba, and he holds up the card that he's about to lay down, and it says, "Why don't you go live in a communist country then?" And then you see Yugi holding his card confidently, and he flips it around, and this is obviously his trap card or whatever, and he's like, "What do you think we're trying to do here?" And then he sends Kaiba to the fucking Shadow Realm.
I love that line when you like are talking about like the positive aspects of socialism or like what sort of plans we could implement here, and people are like, oh well, if you hate this country so much, why don't you move to a communist country and just be like, and abandon my comrades and family? I don't think so.
Yeah, although I'm always tempted to be like, they're like, oh, well, you know, if you spent like 2 weeks in Cuba, you'd be changing your tune. I'm like, are you offering to buy me a ticket? Because please.
Yeah. Hey, why don't we find out? You and me will split the costs on a trip to Cuba. You don't have to go. Or, I mean, get to go.
Yeah.
Maybe it's funnier the other way around. You don't get to go. Or have to go. But I'll hang out in Cuba. I'll eat some fucking ice cream, ride around in a classic car, and eat some wonderful home-cooked meals. And you can keep watching that Lord of the Rings bullshit on Amazon.
Don't watch it. Seriously, pirate it. Even if you've got a Prime subscription, don't give them the numbers. Make them think that
I'm just going to wait.
The Dragon
I'm just
going to
wait until...
Anyway.
Yeah, the new Game of Thrones show is all right. I'm just going to wait until the Lord of the Rings is uploaded to YouTube in a series of best moments supercuts by an account that is in a language I don't recognize.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap. If you want to support the show, we are entirely listener supported. So go to patreon.com/workstoppage and shoot us $5 a month, and you will get access to all of our overtime episodes, our shop floor discussions, like we mentioned, the one on Microsoft and the neutrality agreement. If you'd like to hang out with us, we've been hanging out in the voice chat in the Work Stoppage Discord now. So, jump in the Discord. The link is in the description of this episode. You can also support us by writing a 5-star review literally anywhere. Do a whole mural. And follow John on Twitter at FacebookVillain. Follow the pod at Work Stoppage Pod. Listen to Beep Beep Lettuce. Listen to Red Game Table. And as always, labor peace is not in our interest. Solidarity forever. Hey, that was the line. John, that's what you were talking about.
That was it. You figured it out. That's right. Solidarity forever.
Solidarity, everybody.